Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you here in the chapel, as well as those of you who might be watching on Zoom, and of course those of you who will have the opportunity at another time to watch the video after we've had a chance to post it. We've been studying the life of King Rehoboam, who was the son of King Solomon, and also looking at the law of connection, the leadership law, out of the 21 Most Powerful Minutes in a Leader's Day by John Maxwell. And we're right in the middle then of week number 10. And we're excited to be almost halfway through discussing the law of connection. So just to review with you before we get too far into today's lesson, leaders touch a heart before they ask for a hand. The critical thing here is, of course, is getting the relationship right. You touch the heart first, then you ask for a hand. And so as we think about our time together today, our leadership thought for today simply says, connection starts with a heart. And so let's introduce our study for today. Leadership is not just something that happens. We have to actually, as a leader, earn the right to be followed. So in order to earn that right, to have people follow you, you have to touch the people's hearts. And what that requires is that you be their friend, their teacher, their coach, their mentor. You see, people are smart. Their minds won't embrace. Really, they can't embrace what their hearts can explain. So it has to touch them here before it gets filtered there in your brain. So if you haven't taken the time to show your people that you genuinely care for them, and notice that word genuinely, you care for them, you care for their well-being. If you haven't taken the time to do that, you won't be very successful in leading them, even if your motives are pure. But on the other hand, when people see that they matter to you as individuals, oh, what a difference that makes. Because they see themselves as important, because they see that they're important to you as a leader. And so when they feel like they matter, when they feel like their issues and their concerns matter to you, that will put them in a position where they want to listen to what you have to say. And so let's take a deeper dive this afternoon into changes that Rehoboam could have made in order to connect better with his people. You see, Rehoboam, he both had, but unfortunately missed several opportunities to connect with the hearts of his people. Now, let's look at you for just a minute. If you believe that maybe at some time you might have asked for people's hands before connecting with their hearts, then I've got four concepts or four ideas considering changes that Rehoboam could have made but didn't. But you have the opportunity to go in a different direction. And so these four suggestions, these four ideas: number one, instead of lecturing, listen. Number two, instead of projecting image, project integrity. Three, instead of demanding control, demonstrate compassion. And number four, instead of glaring at others, gaze through their eyes. And we'll unpack that last one in just a little bit. So let's look at this issue of listening. Very important to me because I was a preacher, really still am, but in a very different way from when I pastored a church. When I was pastoring, to me, it was all about speaking and having the right answer to people's questions, problems. So it was very much a position of speaking, but now that I'm a chaplain, things have changed, and chaplaincy is all about listening. And so here we have Rehoboam, who would not listen. He didn't listen to the people. He didn't listen to the elders who gave him wise advice. Instead, he only focused on hearing his own voice rather than listening to his people. So here's a key point. Think back to some recent conversations that you've had with another person. Maybe it was a business conversation. Maybe it was a personal conversation. Doesn't really matter. Here's the question I want to pose to you. In that conversation that you're considering, who did most of the talking? Was it you or was it the other person? Because when you do most of the talking, you miss an opportunity to connect with them. So the next time you're going to have a conversation with somebody, and obviously sometimes these things happen spontaneously and you don't plan it out or set an appointment with them, but the next time you have a conversation with somebody, I want to encourage you to focus more on listening than on talking. Make time to listen to the hearts of your people. So instead of lecturing, listen. Now let's talk a little bit about integrity. I think it's obvious by now, if you've been tracking this week with Rehoboam, that he obviously did not have any value whatsoever for integrity. What really occupied his mind and his aspiration and his thoughts was that he was utterly consumed by this newfound authority that came his way because he was the son of the king, and then when the king passed, he inherited the throne. And so all of a sudden he has this amazing authority, and what dominated his thinking was that he was very fearful that he would be perceived by the people as a weak leader. And so what did he do? He had to demonstrate that he, Rehoboam, was the one in charge. So think about this. If you are the leader, if you're the person in charge, you really shouldn't have to tell people that you're in charge or that you're the leader. They should already know it. If you feel the need to verbally assert your leadership position, then you have a problem, and it may be related to trustworthiness. And so consider take a step back and make sure that you've built trustworthy relationships with your people. Why is that so important? Because if they don't trust, they won't follow. Did you get that? If they don't trust, they won't follow. So it could be other things, but check in and make sure that your relationships with your people are built on trustworthiness. But keep in mind that if you're the leader, they should know it. So you shouldn't need to assert with your words that you're the leader or that you're the one in charge. Okay, let's move on. We're talking now about compassion and control. Actually, compassion instead of control. Okay, now talk about control freaks. I bet you know some control freaks. Now, I'm of course not talking about you, but you know people that you would describe as control freaks. Well, it turns out that Rehoboam absolutely epitomizes what it means to be a control freak. Had he listened to his people and lightened their burden, they would have willfully and joyfully served him and embraced his vision. Think about that. if he had just listened, if he had just responded, they would have willfully and joyfully served him and embraced his vision. Wow. So another key point, when you establish a solid connection with your people, you don't have to lord your control over them. So let's look at a typical situation as a leader. What happens when one of your people makes a mistake? Now, we have two basic options in responding to that mistake, because we're not including do nothing, because that's not really an option. So you have two different ways that you might intervene or bring some level of correction or response to the mistake. So number one, you can hang the mistake over their head and treat them like they're a failure. Number two, you can invest time coaching them so that they will learn from their mistake. Now, let me ask you obviously a rhetorical question. At least I'm certainly meaning it as a rhetorical question. Which option demonstrates compassion? Okay, I promised that I would unpack a little bit this gaze instead of glare. Now, we're not talking about your natural eyes, like staring at somebody or glaring, with a mean look in your eyes. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is this, going back into the story of Rehoboam. He saw the request of the people as an opportunity to build his own image at their expense. Had he taken the time to look at the situation through their eyes, think how differently the outcome would have been. And here's the kicker, that outcome would have been different, not just for the people, it would have been very different for Rehoboam himself. Because remember, Israel right now at this time was 12 tribes, and 10 of them, 10 out of 12, said, we are no longer going to follow you. And so one kingdom became two, Judah and Israel. And in Rehoboam's, throughout his reign, war was constantly at hand. None of that had to happen. But because he made a very foolish decision early on, it cost him dearly. So, what about your leadership situation? Are your people excited about the work they do and that the organization is doing? Here's another question. Do you know how your people perceive you as a leader? When you are able to understand these issues, where your people are coming from, which you gain, of course, by listening to them, they can provide you with incredibly valuable insight regarding how you should lead them. So think about those issues. Are they excited about the work? Are they excited about what the organization is doing? Because that's when they'll want to be involved, and they'll want to be engaged, and they'll want to give it their best shot. And of course, how they perceive you as a leader. How important it is to know that information. How much helpful it would be to you as a leader. And the insight that you would gain will dramatically improve how you lead them. So gaze instead of glare. And so I invite you to consider our conclusion today as we begin to wind down anyway. John Maxwell writes in his book, The 21 Most Powerful Minutes in a Leader's Day. Of course, this is the book that we've been using all along and will continue to use throughout the remainder of this leadership study. On page 162, he says this: the way that leaders deal with change says a lot about their effectiveness. Ineffective leaders, like Rehoboam, often fear change at all costs and never break free of the status quo. Now, I'll stop the quote there to just say this, that Rehoboam comes across as a very insecure leader. And insecure leaders will also be very resistant to change, because based on their insecurity is what leads to the sense of being a control freak. And of course, change can upset that. And so that's why people prefer to remain in the status quo. So the result of never embracing change can be catastrophic. It doesn't necessarily happen all at one time, but what happens is that your momentum will eventually come to a halt, and leadership becomes stagnant. You're not moving forward anymore. Now, on the other hand, Maxwell writes, effective leaders are teachable. They have a zest to learn. Their eyes, their ears are always open to learn more, and they embrace change as a catalyst for growth and improvement. So when it comes to developing productive relationships, flexibility is absolutely essential. So we've crossed 3 days into our study of this wonderful law of connection. I think it's so incredibly valuable that we embrace the necessity of the law of connection, to touch people's hearts before we ask for their hand. And so I invite you to consider, as we do at the conclusion of each one of our Monday through Thursday lessons, our question for reflection. So today we're asking you this question: what changes are you willing to make to improve your ability to connect? Now, I might add that embedded in that question is an assumption that you value the benefit of connection. Because if you don't value the importance of connection with people, then obviously you're not going to be willing to make any changes because you won't see the need to. But making the assumption that over these last 3 days you've been able to sense how crucial it is as a leader to be able to connect with your people, I invite you to consider, what changes might you be willing to make to improve your ability to connect? And this isn't just for people who struggle with this issue, because no matter whether it comes very naturally to you and you're pretty gifted already at connecting with people, we can always grow and improve even more. So wherever you are on this continuum of connection, whether it comes naturally to you or whether you have to work really hard at it, what changes might you consider making to improve your ability to connect? We just thank you so much for your continued involvement and participation in this leadership study. I trust that it is a blessing to you and that it adds value to you. It's an honor to have this time with you each and every day. And I look forward to being back tomorrow at 3:30. And then on Good Friday, of course, every Friday's at 1:30. So we just simply ask God's blessing on each and every one of you for the rest of this day. And we look forward to seeing you back at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your day.